Okay, we're ready. I suspect that all Gloucester Civic Trust guides will have at some time heard the story that the Romans floated rocks down from quarries in the Cotswolds, down the River Twyver, to build the new Gleven settlement on the banks of the River Severn. Now, some say that the monks might also have used the same method in later years in building their abbey. Even though in times past there must have been more water in the River Twyver, this still seems a highly unlikely possibility, easy to dismiss as an interesting legend with no written evidence to substantiate it. After all, the Twyver is just a stream, and its sources on the lower slopes of the escarpment are below any quarries that existed up there. My fascination with the River Twyver stems from the fact that I live quite close to its course along the Abbey-Mead-Abbeydale boundary, and why all the watercourses, all 7 of the watercourses that flow down from the Cotswolds down into the River Severn in the vicinity of Gloucester, it is only one that's actually called a river. All the others are just brooks. My research on the River Twyver in Heritage Open Days talk I gave at Heritage Open Days 2020 hopefully answered the river question and proved a fascinating journey into the history and geography of that particular watercourse. It revealed interesting facts and locations with regard to historical stories which made more sense, including the myth concerning what I have called the Roman Rock Road. Of its existence, purpose, and application, I now have the evidence that has convinced me of its historic reality, and I hope in this talk, despite the passage of 2,000 years of time, I can convince you as well. This, of course, is my personal opinion, and I invite you to challenge anything I say if you have an alternative view. Now, I also suspect that many people, most people probably in Gloucester, would not realise that the Twyver flowing through Gloucester, mostly now culverted, is actually a canal built by the Romans when they moved their garrison from Kingsholm to the site of the present-day Gloucester, because they needed a water supply. And the nearest water course was the Sudbrook, off the map here, but indicated on the left-hand side at the bottom. The Sudbrook then flowed past the western perimeter of what is now Gloucester Park into the Severn. Unfortunately, this point is 50 foot lower than the new garrison. At that time, the Twyver flowed into the Sudbrook, where the St. Bridge Pond now exists. On this aerial picture you can see the old Twyver down the bottom there and the Sudbrook. The Roman solution was to dig a canal from the Twyver in more or less a straight line from Abbey-Mead, which is now Abbey-Mead, to the city. The canal actually started here, just behind the Abbeydale Community Centre. The branch going off to the left is going down to the Sudbrook, but at that time the Romans cut that off and dug a new canal, which you can see in the centre of the picture, which is the present Twyver. In fact, the branch going to the left was reinstated after the Romans cut it off, but hundreds of years later when Abbeydale was actually built as a housing estate. So it now once again flows into the Twyver. Some maps will call this branch the Twyver, some the Sudbrook. But our interest is in the canalised Twyver, which is going out to the top of the picture. At the northeast corner of the city, and in later years, as shown on this map of 1455, a branch called the Fullbrook was taken at the northeast corner of the city to provide water for the abbey. The main branch ultimately entered the Old Severn near the original Kingsholm garrison, and the Fullbrook, flowing through the abbey, discharged its water into the Severn near the St Oswald's, which is now just a ruin, of course. During my research for the River Twyver talk, I discovered two interesting articles from Glavensis, the journal of the Bristol and Gloucestershire Archaeology Society, one by Ellie Poolbrook Leggett, who mentioned the legend. This idea was explored further by another article later by Harold Wingham in his paper Harding's High Brotherage and Leggett's Legends. In it, he provides plausible evidence of an ancient road connecting the quarries at the ancient Iron Age hilltop fort at Brotherage up in Cranham Woods across the A46 at Fiddler's Elbow near Prinish Abbey to Upton Mill. Here's the sketch map. We'll see that in more details in a moment. So on the right, we've got Fiddler's Elbow, and on the left, though not marked, is Upton Mill. I followed up this theory by searching for this road. And in one of my walks around the escarpment, seeking out the sources of the Twyver, I followed up I got completely lost. I just did that, didn't I? Did that again. Completely lost by following a wrong track and resorted to the compass on my iPhone to point me in generally the right direction. Now, walking to the edge of a field, I stumbled, almost literally, into an overgrown hollow, which revealed what could definitely have been an ancient road. It was clearly not the bed of a stream. It was too wide at that altitude, and there was no sign of water, and it was not following any natural valley. To me then, it was clearly man-made. And in the following weeks, I ventured back up to the hills, and using Harold Wingham's sketch map as a guide, this is what I discovered. When the Romans moved from Kingsholm to their to their new garrison on the present site of Gloucester, they would have built it with wood. Once the Welsh were under control, the soldiers moved on, leaving behind their retired colleagues who were granted land to settle and form a colonia, a Roman colony. The former garrison then became more permanently settled as Glevum. This required stone for walls and buildings. There were stone quarries up on the Cotswold escarpment near that old Iron Age fort of Brotherage, now in the depths of Cranham Woods, some 6 miles from Gloucester down in the valley. But how to get a considerable amount of stone down there? Now, we know the Romans were good at building roads in ancient Britain, so could they have built a road for the transportation of the rock? Up on Fiddler's End, Fiddler's Elbow on the A46, there are 2 houses on that bend in the A46 road. Behind the houses rises Cranham Woods. Here, up in Cranham Woods, just behind those houses are, as you can see there, the sign of what probably are the ancient quarries, dense in the woodland there. And also appears to be an ancient track which stretches right up the hill up to the centre of the Brotherage site. Now, I have called this talk the Roman Rock Road, but there is a possibility here that this section could have been built before the Romans by the Iron Age inhabitants, and the Roman used it as part of their project of getting the stone from these quarries down to Glevum, first by a road and then later on the River Twyver. Crossing the A46 and looking downhill, which I'm standing just to the side of those 2 houses, we can see this possible Roman road starts a short distance down the hill. The green area you can see there and the bushes in the mid-distance, which you can see slightly on the left-hand side, is where the evidence starts. So as we trace the track down the hill, let's first look at where we were talking about on an Ordnance Survey map. The red line I put in is basically Wingham's sketch, slightly different angle, but the same shape you can see. And on this map, you can see exactly where it is. So we're going from Fiddler's Elbow on the right here up to Upton Mill, the top left. Notice that the road is midway between the two of the Twyver sources. There are a number of sources to the River Twyver, but those particular two. And if you look at the contours on there, you'll see that where that bend, that sharp bend in the green area, in fact, that the road, that red line should actually be in the middle of the green area, but it would obscure it if I put it in there. But at the midpoint there, you can see that the contours are wider there, which indicates a lower slope, but not such a steep slope. So it's deliberately been taken down a convenient sloping way down, which would make it more manageable than going down the steepest part. Now let's look at the route. I've walked this way all the way down and have the photos to show you. Along this first section, okay, those are the bushes I pointed out on that view from the A46. The track is initially concealed between two fenced fields. There's a fence on both sides and this gap between them, which is full of undergrowth and not really evidence of seeing him at all. But walking down the hill on the footpath, you come to a gap in these in the undergrowth and go into the next field. Here, there's this much wider gully that I discovered sort of accidentally. And you can see it's a wider gully, so perhaps designed for two trucks to actually pass. The field is not fenced in, it's private property, of course, but it was relatively easy to access. And at the end of the gully, when we get down to the bottom of the steepest part of the hill, we come into a lane near Peaked Acres Cottage. The route now follows a lane and a bridleway, but evidence for the continuation of the track as a road is seen in this photograph, what is surely more than just a bridleway, judging by the width of it. We're now approaching the end of our rock carrying journey on terra firma at Rooksmoor. And at Rooksmoor, same map, just moved over a little bit so you can see some more photographs. We come to the tributary, a red line at the top there of the Twyver has come down from the Pincott Farm source and you'll see there, just at that point there, then we can see a large gully. A continuation of this is clearly seen along the edge of the field further up, as it leads on to join the main flow of the Twyver just below the Upton Mill. Now in this diagram, which is a 25-inch Ordnance Survey map of 1955, notice some interesting things. Notice that at Rooksmoor, you can see the, I'll try and move my pointer here if I can, my cursor, yes it is. You see, this is where those last photographs were taken, that wider gap there and also around here. Then it seems that the stream carries on and just before Upton Mill, which is over here, then it's wider again. And my suspicion is that is where the wider area of the stream, the brook that's coming down here, would have been where they would taken the floating barges, and so they would have probably gone on at Rooksmoor. This is all conjecture, of course. I mustn't say too much about that because a few hundred yards away from that Rooksmoor Gully, just above the mill, again I'll try and point out in this area here, I think I've put an X on there, yes, where this X is, there is a kind of gully there, and the elderly gentleman who lived at Upton Mill told me that this is where the rocks were loaded onto the river. Now, personally, I do not subscribe to this theory, and I suspect the gully was part of this gully was part of the mill pond or head race of Upton Mill. It seems more logical to me that the loading point from the trucks onto the barges would have been along this Brooksmoor stretch over here, around here. And they would have floated them then down this wider part here. This was probably wider, but in more recent years, of course, over the centuries, it's been filled in, and it's filled in now, this one. So you reach this point here, and this point, well, sorry, that's I'm just showing the photographs I've shown you in the last slide. But at Upton Mill now, here, that point there, here, there, everywhere, you can see this is the Twyver coming along here. Out after it's been through Upton Mill, there's the actual mill house, but this is where it comes in from the brook coming down from Pincock Mill, Pincock Farm, and that's where I think they were floated in. Now at this place, at this part of the Twyver, all the various sources have come together at this stage. So this is the widest part of the River Twyver. Now, just for interest, I've got a picture here of a Roman cart. Now, that was something I got off the internet, but it's probably a kind of cart that they would have used. And I can imagine rocks on there and these being brought down that fairly steep track, but certainly a track which they could have used to carry the rocks down. And once on the barge, well, again, this is an archive picture from the library. It's too big, but it shows a typical Roman river barge. In fact, it looks as if there's rocks actually loaded on here. Now, the fall of the Twyver from its sources to the River Severn is only a few hundred feet, so the flow would be quite slow, and the river probably not sufficiently deep enough to float rock-laden barges along its course. Now, a possible solution would be to dig ponds at suitable intervals, which could be dammed with sluices, gates and weirs in order to fill them up to provide a reservoir of water. Opening the sluices would then release a surge of water from these reservoirs on which the raft could float down to the next pond, and so on until they reached the site of Gleven. Before the invention of locks on rivers, this method was used to enable boats to navigate rapids or drops in the level. If this was the method used by the Romans for their rock supply, then logically it could have been adopted by the monks some centuries later to bring their rocks down to build the abbey. But it could also explain why there are so many mills on the Twyver, because they could have used the Roman ponds at these suitable intervals, and as the mill ponds, and they could then become mill ponds in order to drive the mills. There's the whole length of the Twyver, there's about 12 or 13 mills at some stage over their history. And on this section here, where they would have floated the rocks down, then you can see they're relatively equally spaced, and there's about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 there on that picture there, plus the other two at the top to Upton Mill. So, what is our conclusion? Well, the Romans were very active in building roads across much of Britain during their occupation, so this would have been well within their capabilities. Unfortunately, there is no written evidence to substantiate this. So I'll just have to leave you with my findings, and you can make up your own minds. Thank you for listening, and if you have any queries, then you can get in touch with me, and any suggestions you have to make, I will greatly receive. And I thank the Gloucestershire Archives for some source material, and the River Twyver and the Fullbrook by Leggett. Thank you.